the problem of physicalism is how it's possible that experiences would be physical processes because science cannot capture what experiences feel like. So even if you know the ideal neuroscientific description of red experiences, you cannot know what red feels like or looks like. Or even if you know everything about a psychedelic experience, for example, you cannot infer what it feels like to really undergo that experience. And this has led many philosophers, David Chalmers is possibly the most famous of them, and nowadays Philip Goff is also a leading figure. They think that this shows this, what is called epistemic gap between science and subjective consciousness. They think that it shows that consciousness cannot be physical, or at least physical in the traditional sense. So they believe in the so-called qualia that constitute what experiences feel like. And they think that these qualia are distinct from the properties that science models. So when, for example, I have a psychedelic experience for the first time, what I learn, what I didn't know previously, is the qualia related to the experience. But what I in principle could have known previously were everything else about psychedelic experience. And Philip Goff calls these extrinsic properties of psychedelic experiences. Or he doesn't talk about psychedelic experiences, but he would say that. So what are extrinsic properties? Well, they are the properties that science models, relational properties. For example, force equals mass times acceleration. So science just models properties in relation to each other, how they are related to each other. But Goff says that science doesn't model what these scientific properties are intrinsically or in themselves, independently of how they are related to each other. And according to Goff, what experiences feel like is part of such intrinsic nature of matter. So he says that science only tells us what matter does, but not what it is. So he makes this kind of metaphysical distinction between relational properties and what things are in themselves, like the categorical basis of these relational properties that science models. And they are also called quiddities by David Lewis, or they are inscrutables is the thesis of Montero. Was that the name of the philosopher? Categoricals, in contrast to dispositional properties that science models. So the claim is that it's intertwined with larger metaphysical questions, but in essence the claim is that these qualia believers make is that what experiences feel like is somehow completely private and beyond the scope of standard science. And eliminativism denies the existence of qualia in this sense. It denies the existence of this set of properties that constitutes what experiences feel like, if that set of properties is something distinct from what science models. I have to shift lanes here. All right. So eliminativism says that there are no qualia. And they also would say that there are no intrinsic properties beyond those that science models, and there are no quiddities that underlie these dispositional properties or inscrutables that cannot be modeled by science. So eliminativism denies this class of properties, and I think that's really commonsensical, because it would require some really strong premises to infer the existence of this kind of set of properties, completely distinct from everything else what we are familiar with. Everything we are familiar with is really dispositional properties here, how things interact with each other. But some people think that eliminativism, or the denial of these kinds of properties, qualia intrinsic properties, it amounts to the denial of consciousness. Some people think that eliminativism eliminates consciousness. It does eliminate qualia, if that means intrinsic properties or these quiddities or inscrutables, something distinct from what science models. But does eliminativism claim that consciousness doesn't exist, or that experiences don't feel like anything? At least Keith Frankish, I think he would not commit to such thesis. I think he has explicitly denied it. He admits that experiences feel like something, pain feels bad, and orgasms feel good, and so on. But he would just, I don't know what he would say, but at least my view is that what experience feels like is this, right here, right now. This is what it feels like. And this is the happening of a process here. This, what happens now, constitutes what this feels like. It's just this, driving home from corona vaccination. So what is this? Neuroscience would say that this is a neural process, what I'm experiencing now, although right now, at least right now, this neural process is interacting with the cars that I see and the trees and so on. The car I'm driving here. So that's what neuroscience says that this is. But then we are led to the epistemic gap. I could know everything about, I could exist here and know what this is like. I would know what pain feels like and what pleasure feels like without knowing that I have a brain at all. I might believe, like some ancient people believed, that the feelings are in the heart, not in the brain. And on the other hand, I could know everything about brains without knowing that the processes in the brains feel like anything. So there is still this epistemic gap. So how can it be that what this feels like here is just a brain process? So I think here the way out of this dilemma is to acknowledge that, to say that consciousness is a brain process is to say that we can model consciousness as a brain process. We can observe it as a brain process, and we can build theories about it as a brain process. But what is it in itself beyond those observations and theories? Well, it's this, of course. This is what produces the observations of brain activity and what neuroscience might model as integrated information or global neural activation and so on. And I have spoken a lot about this, so I won't go into it further. So now we can get to the point of eliminativist panpsychism. Eliminativism is the denial of the existence of properties beyond the scope of science. Eliminativism says that there are no there is no this kind of magical set of private, completely private and inscrutable properties that constitute what experiences feel like. The eliminativism is basically the claim that what goes on in the brain is just the neural processes that science can describe, or some similar processes. That there are no some kind of intrinsic properties or qualia in addition to those properties or processes that science describes. But the point here is that science merely describes properties or processes. It's like there is, when we understand, they don't give room for lane shifts. When we understand that the model is not the modeled, and that the scientific picture is just a picture, distinct from what it's about. This is what it's about, this here, right now. When we understand this, then there is no longer the need to postulate the existence of some separate class of properties that constitute what experiences feel like. Then we can understand that this really is nothing but a neural process. And when we say this, it means that this experience right now is nothing but what science models as a neural process. So this is what the modeled is in itself, beyond the scientific model about it. And when we understand this, there is no longer the need to postulate the existence of some qualia, if that means some separate class of properties. And well, I said that this eliminativist core thesis is really sane, commonsensical, because it's really just a denial of property dualism. It's just monism, that there is only one class of properties, those that science models. It's also like naturalism, that science can model all properties, but just model, only model. Science is the business of modeling and nothing else. So this is something, Schopenhauer had this kind of theory, although it also has a lot of metaphysical nonsense. Sorry, Schopenhauer fans. But it's really different from what Russellian monists or panpsychists claim, like Philip Goff claims, because all the forms of panpsychism that are nowadays alive, they postulate this existence of these intrinsic properties that underlie and are distinct from the properties that science models. And we don't need to do that to find a place for consciousness in nature, because consciousness is part of the nature in itself that science just models. And when we understand this, then we see that eliminativism is not incompatible with panpsychism, because we can see that this right here, we can say that this is nothing but a neural process. This is made of molecules, atoms and quarks. And if that's the case, then atoms and molecules and quarks are the constituents of this right here, right now. It's all it's a continuum. Consciousness is continuous with everything else that exists. It's not categorically different. So you can call this, if you want, you can call this a kind of panpsychism that things in themselves or processes in themselves beyond our observations and models about them, they are all continuous with consciousness. And really physicalism implies this claim, as it says that everything is physical. Physicalism is monism, and if we endorse monism, then it follows that everything belongs to the same ontological category as this. Everything is same as this right here. So everything is same as consciousness. It's all forms of the same energy that science models, but only models. When we understand that science is nothing but the business of modeling, then this opens up the possibility, at least the possibility, that everything beyond the models is continuous with consciousness. So that's how eliminativist panpsychism is really possible. Hej då!